Welcome to Silk Dark Secrets, where darkness tells its secrets. When Innocence faded into shadows. Part 2. The Unspoken Equation. As the first year dissolved into the second, the unspoken bond between Aarav and Anaya deepened into something that defied a simple label. They were entirely inseparable. To the rest of the college, they were a package deal. Wherever the star athlete went, the brilliant science student was nearby, and vice versa. For Aarav, this period was a beautiful, agonizing torture. He knew every detail of her face, the exact pitch of her laugh when she was genuinely amused, and the way she bit her lower lip when a physics problem wasn't balancing out. He was completely, irrevocably in love with her. Yet, the fear of losing the fragile, beautiful world they had built kept his lips completely sealed. He chose the safety of silence over the risk of rejection. But love, much like the physical laws Anaya studied, has a way of exerting force even when it cannot be seen. It was a crisp late afternoon, just after the mid-semester exams. The campus was mostly empty, students having fled to the city to celebrate the break. Aarav had just finished a grueling practice session on the football field. Exhausted, his jersey damp with sweat, he walked toward the secluded stone benches behind the old science block, their designated meeting spot. He found Anaya sitting exactly where he expected, but her usual posture was missing. She wasn't buried in a thick textbook, nor was she mapping out molecular structures. She was simply staring at the concrete ground, her fingers tightly laced together in her lap. "Hey," Aarav said, dropping his sports bag onto the grass and taking a seat beside her. He caught a whiff of the familiar, comforting scent of her jasmine hair oil. "We survived the exams. Why the gloomy face? Did you actually get a 99% instead of a 100% in organic chemistry?" Usually, a joke like that would earn him a playful swat on the arm or a sharp, witty comeback. Today, Anaya didn't even move. "Aarav," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the rustle of the dry leaves. The casual smile dropped from Aarav's face. His athletic instincts, always sharp, instantly shifted into an intense alertness. "What is it? What's wrong, Anaya?" She turned her head to look at him. The usual bright, innocent sparkle in her eyes was masked by a heavy layer of uncertainty. What happens when a stable system suddenly loses its core element? In physics, it collapses. Everything falls apart. She paused, her voice trembling slightly. What happens when someone suddenly leaves your life? Aarav's heart skipped a violent beat. A sudden, cold dread washed over him, far colder than the autumn breeze. "Who's leaving, Anaya? What are you talking about?" "My father got his transfer orders this morning," she whispered, looking back down at her hands. "It's a promotion, but it's in a different state. He wants us to relocate before the next month ends. I'll have to transfer my credits to a new university there." For a few agonizing seconds, the world around Aarav went completely silent. The distant sound of traffic outside the campus gates vanished. The wind stopped. He looked at her profile, the girl who had become the very center of his daily existence, the reason he memorized boring history facts, the reason he looked forward to rainy days. A life without her wasn't just a sad thought. It felt like an absolute impossibility. A terrifying urge surged within him. "Tell her," his mind screamed. "Tell her you love her. Tell her to stay. Or tell her you'll follow her anywhere." The words rushed to the back of his throat, hot and desperate. But then, the familiar, paralyzing fear locked its grip on him. What if she doesn't feel the same? What if confessing now makes her final weeks here awkward and filled with guilt? What if I ruin the only beautiful thing I have left? He swallowed the confession, forcing the heavy lump down his throat. Next month, Aarav managed to say, his voice sounding hollow, even to his own ears. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers for a fraction of a second before he pulled it back, gripping the edge of the stone bench instead. That's really sudden. Yeah, Anaya said, a faint, incredibly sad smile touching her lips. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, looking for something, a sign, a plea, a single word that begged her to fight the relocation. But Aarav, terrified of breaking the illusion of their perfect friendship, forced a brave, empty smile onto his face. Well, your dad worked really hard for that promotion. And a new university will have better research labs for you. You are going to change the world. Remember? Anaya stared at him for a long moment, the tiny glimmer of hope in her eyes slowly dimming into a quiet, resigned disappointment. She pulled her gaze away, staring back into the empty courtyard as the shadows of the trees stretched longer across the ground. Yeah, she whispered, her voice flatter now. The labs will be better. They sat in silence as the sun began its slow descent, both of them trapped in a prison of their own unspoken words, completely unaware that the ticking clock had just begun to run out. The fog on platform 3. The morning of her departure arrived wrapped in a dense, suffocating grey. Winter had settled early over the city, bringing with it a thick blanket of fog that swallowed the tops of the buildings and turned the streetlights into blurry, distant halos. Aarav stood on platform 3, his hands jammed deep into the pockets of his heavy jacket. The railway station was a chaotic symphony of cold misery. The screech of iron wheels against the tracks, the loud blare of announcements over the cracked speakers, and the hurried rush of passengers pushing past one another like ghosts in the mist. Yet, amid the hundreds of moving bodies, Aarav's eyes were locked onto just one. Anaya stood near the door of the train compartment, wrapped in a dark woolen shawl. The damp air had caused her hair to curl slightly around her face, and her nose was flushed pink from the biting cold. Her family's heavy luggage had already been loaded into the carriage, symbolizing a finality that made Aarav's throat tighten until it ached. She turned to face him, stepping out of the stream of passing travelers. When she looked up, Aarav felt a sharp, familiar pang in his chest. The brilliant, analytical spark that usually defined her eyes was entirely drowned in unshed tears. The visibility is terrible today, Anaya said softly, her voice barely audible over the roaring engine of a passing freight train. She was trying to anchor herself to logic, to science, to anything that wasn't the reality of leaving. They said the train might be delayed, but it looks like it's right on time. Yeah, Aarav replied. His voice sounded like sandpaper. Indian Railways is surprisingly punctual when you actually want them to be late. Anaya let out a small, trembling laugh that broke halfway through. She took a half step closer to him, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her shawl. You won't forget me, right, Aarav? When the new semester starts, and someone else is ruining Mishra's history lectures. Inside Aarav's chest, a violent storm was raging. Tell her right now. A desperate voice screamed in his head. Grab her hand. Tell her that the football field is empty without her. that the canteen tea tastes like water, that you love her so much it makes it hard to breathe. Just say the words. He could see the quiet plea in her eyes, the same look she had given him in the garden 3 weeks ago. She was standing on the precipice of a completely new life, terrified, waiting for him to give her a reason to look back. But as Aarav opened his mouth, the crushing weight of his own insecurity slammed down on him. If you tell her you love her now, you throw a burden onto her shoulders right as she's leaving. You make her feel guilty for her father's promotion. If she doesn't feel the same way, you taint every beautiful memory you've ever shared. Be a man. Let her go cleanly. He swallowed the confession, burying it deep into the shadows of his heart, and forced a bright, completely empty smile onto his face. Are you crazy? Aarav teased, his tone intentionally light, though it felt like tearing glass in his throat. Friends never forget each other. Anaya, you're going to be a brilliant scientist, and I'm going to make sure your name is credited in every research paper, so I can brag about knowing you. The disappointment that flitted across Anaya's face was microscopic, but because Aarav knew every line of her expressions, it hit him like a physical blow. She realized, in that exact second, that the door he kept locked between them was never going to open. Right, she whispered, her eyes dropping to the concrete platform. Friends. A sharp, deafening whistle pierced the foggy air. The train gave a violent, mechanical shudder, and the heavy iron wheels groaned as they began to rotate, inching forward. Anaya looked up sharply, panic finally breaking through her calm facade. Before she could think, she stepped forward and threw her arms around Aarav's neck, burying her face into his shoulder. Aarav froze for a fraction of a second before wrapping his arms tightly around her, pulling her against him. She felt small, fragile, and entirely precious. He buried his face into her jasmine-scented hair, closing his eyes so tightly that it hurt, trying to imprint the physical sensation of holding her into his permanent memory. Neither of them spoke. In the heavy silence of their embrace, all the unsaid words, the I love yous, the please stays, the I can't do this without yous, vibrated between them, completely understood, yet entirely unacknowledged. Time to get on, Anaya. Her mother's voice called out from the carriage door. Anaya pulled away slowly, her cheeks now wet with tears. She didn't wipe them. She offered him one last, heartbreakingly sad smile, turned around, and climbed up the metal steps of the moving train. Aarav stepped alongside the train as it picked up speed, his eyes glued to her window. Anaya pressed her hand against the glass, her lips moving silently as she waved. Goodbye, Aarav. He stopped walking at the very edge of platform 3, watching the red light at the back of the train fade into the dense, unyielding fog. Within seconds, the train was completely swallowed by the grey mist, leaving behind nothing but the cold screech of the tracks and an unbearable, echoing emptiness. Aarav stood perfectly still as the crowd slowly dispersed around him. He took his hands out of his pockets and looked at his palms. They felt completely numb. He had protected her from strict professors, from bad grades, and from the rain, but in trying to protect their friendship from the truth, he had lost her completely. As the fog settled heavily over the empty tracks, Aarav felt the last remaining warmth of his youth slip away, leaving behind a boy who had finally learned that silence is the heaviest thing a heart can carry. For the complete story, visit Silk Dark Secrets, or wait for the third part. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated with future stories and uploads.